Session to order. Roll call.
Mayor Surtee,
Here.
Vice Mayor Wilson,
Here.
Councilmember Barker. Here. Councilmember Evans. Here. Councilmember Rizzi.
Present.
Councilmember Struble.
Here.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Here.
You have a quorum, Your
I'm
Honor?
here.
Presentation by and discussion with staff and members of the Health and Human Services Commission regarding fiscal year 19 and 20. Jennifer.
Applications for human services funding were due January 31st of this year. We had 4 applicants submit their paperwork. The Health and Human Services Commission met twice this year to review the applications, and then they also interviewed all applicants. While the funding requests this year totaled $148,000, the commission did remain within the $80,000 budgeted allotment. Commission member Mary Erickson is here this evening to present their findings and answer any questions the council may have.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, staff. First of all, I want to thank you for having a Health and Human Services Commission, which is something that not all communities have. And the purpose of a Health and Human Services Commission is to actually provide advice and recommendations for the needs of our community. And we had 4 agencies that came before the commission to apply for funding. And as we listened to their recommendation or their proposals for funding, we realized that each one of them actually are providing an amazing service to our community. And I think you have the recommendations in front of you. I can go over them individually and just make a few comments on them. But before I do that, the task, the way that we went about it was first to review the applications for the material, which was quite thick, of course, and review the documentation requirements for nonprofit agencies using the compliance checklist, and they were within the compliance checklist as well. We decided to interview each one of the agencies. First of all, we have 2 new members on our commission, and we wanted to be able to have them, and all of us, to get to know our community nonprofits a little bit better. And finally, after they provided their, their presentations, we deliberated and determined how to allocate the funds. And in determining the distribution of funds, we took a look at, the process of funding. And originally, the funds were intended for new programs and to help establish programs that had not been done in the past. And many of our agencies that are receiving funding year after year. And we asked them, if they were able to find funding in other areas in the event that funding was not available. And, some of them have greater capabilities. Some of them are larger. Mm-hmm. Some of them are doing as much as they can and are actually getting some funds from individuals, from other organizations. But it's a real struggle as a nonprofit to be able to be funded. We did have one agency that came with a new program that is really needed, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. But we also mentioned to the agencies that this is not a grant. And I think in the past, agencies have had, difficulty in their believing that, the funds are just given to them and the reporting requirements would not be necessary. But it is, actually required for them to provide quarterly reports and to meet all the documentation requirements. And I think this was clearly stated. And the agencies have a plan to meet and to record the meeting of residents of Apache Junction. So I think that really will help us as we provide the funding for our community members. So the first organization to receive funding, we recommended $24,500 to the food bank for City of Apache Junction residents that are struggling with food insecurity for emergency food distribution to those that live within the City of Apache Junction. They serve outside of our city as well, but they have been able to document and maintain records that really prove the number of people that are being served within our community. This organization also has just an amazing track record and are looking at ways to get funding from other outside sources, including the food drive recently. Their largest amount of income comes from individual donors. So, but they still, even with all the funds that come in, they need more to help meet the food insecurity, the food security needs for our community. The second agency is one that we're familiar with, the East Valley Boys and Girls Club, the Superstition Branch, right here in Apache Junction. And they also, we recommended providing $24,500 for educational enhancement programs to assure academic success for low to moderate income children. And they have a number of programs that will assure that these kids are able to succeed in school, to graduate, to become members of our community that can contribute back to our community. The third one was for the Community Alliance Against Family Abuse, and the commission recommends $16,000 to empower individuals, families, and our community to be free from abuse through, and they will do this through collaboration, through prevention, awareness, and support programs. And again, they listed a number of types of programs that they are doing to meet the needs of our residents within our community. And the new kid on the block is Horizon Health and Wellness. And they came to the table requesting funds to do a Train the Trainer program so that their staff could have training in applied suicide intervention skills. And it's called Safe Talk. This is a internationally known program for suicide prevention that even the military is using. And this they will use to then train educators, to train community members, to help identify at-risk kids, and to know what to do to prevent suicide.
Could I ask a question on that one? Since Horizon is a for-profit business.
No, they are not.
They're not, they don't have doctors, and part of it is it not?
This agency is a nonprofit.
Okay, so if you'd explain that to the people, they might be under that assumption, so if you'd explain that, how that does break down.
They came with a lot of the documentation, as far I don't have it in front of me right now, but the actual funding, this is a program they do not have, and they do have a tight budget which allocates for the needs for treatment for services that they provide. They also do provide a lot of service pro bono within our community. And what they're talking about establishing is a Train the Trainer program, an educational type of program that would go far outside of their boundaries for their agency, but would also look at meeting the needs of our entire community. The suicide prevention is something that within the last few weeks, the governor passed a bill that will require schools to have this training. They will be in the schools this year. The governor's mandate isn't starting for at least another year, and then they won't have trained personnel. Our teachers, our educators, anyone that comes in contact with at-risk kids in our community, I think will be a target of education training, and then to help bring them into treatment if they need it for them and their families. So although this is a larger organization. It's a new program, and this really fits the need and the vision of the Health and Human Services Commission to establish new programs within our community to meet the needs. This is suicide is a growing problem within our entire nation. So I don't know if that helps people to understand the rationale behind why we chose to fund all 4 of them. And the other thing that we noted is that each one of these agencies work with similar populations. And in many instances, a family with a child at risk is also receiving food, is also perhaps having that child enrolled in the Boys and Girls Club, may receive services from CAFA. So we might be looking at wraparound services that would totally empower these families to break the cycle of violence, to help them to improve their capabilities of gaining an education, to become members of our society that are productive and can give back to the community. In the future, our commission is looking at, meeting to look at additional ways outside of, reviewing funds that we can actually help the community and be a liaison to the city council as far as what other needs does our community have, and how can we, I think by getting these agencies to collaborate, to work together more closely, is going to have, give us more bang for the buck, so to speak, with the money that we do have, by having agencies that are willing to work together and that can see the need and can provide funding in one area while serving in another area.
Any more questions?
I have a couple. For CAFA, in reading about empowerment sessions in legal advocacy services and general advocacy, do you know, do they have any licensed people over there where they also tap into like access charges, like for the empowerment sessions, or are they just volunteers? Are they LISICs? Are they social workers?
I don't think other members of the commission have stepped or have come tonight. I think other members would know more about that. That was not one of the questions that we gave or that we had for them. I know that their services, are very significant. Whether or not they're able to get reimbursement for the funding, I cannot give you that answer right now. I can try to get that to you in another, by tomorrow.
Okay. And my other question is, because these applications have to be in January, they're not interviewed until May, which to me is an issue because things come up between January and May.
Absolutely.
That they would have wanted to apply for. For instance, the Boys and Girls Club, they've had a couple of really great, successful fundraisers, but they were after the January application.
And we asked each of the agencies if they had applied for additional funds other than what they had on their application. So we were able to get some of that information. But I agree with you. I think that the commission needs to look at the entire process and try to make it more user-friendly for everyone in earlier meetings and distribution, if possible. I think we need to take a look at that in the future.
There's a pretty big lag there.
Councilmember Evans, through the mayor, if I may, the contract that we will be bringing in June does stipulate the January 31st deadline. So if council wishes to change that deadline, we may have to do something with the contract.
But would your office be able to produce those contracts quicker?
I believe so.
Okay.
Well, the contract starts on July 1st because it's a,
Right, but
The fiscal year.
Process.
the unknown lag of why January because they're not even interviewed until May. So from January to May,
Yeah, they could get
They-
an application in
they
later.
still should be able to place applications, but they
Yes.
can't.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would just like to add that for the process, I'm thrilled to hear that our commission would like to tackle that process opportunity. Great opportunity to improve it with technology, the way our systems are set up. There's absolutely, in my mind, no reason why we couldn't improve it.
Do we have to, and I guess maybe this is a Joel question, I'm not sure. Because we budget for 80,000, do we have to give out the 80,000? Can we keep it in in like an emergency fund? Say if the roof blew off the food bank, dear God, that's not what I'm hoping for, but just,
Transmission goes out.
yeah, something like that.
I had a feeling you'd ask this question.
Did you?
I don't know why, but
It just came to
under,
you.
under City Code 214-2D, the council can take some money, put it aside. It's not defined in the code, and maybe this is something the Health and Human Services Commission may want to look at. It's for catastrophic or public health, safety, or welfare is at risk. So it's a catastrophic event, or it's a public health, safety, welfare situation that is at risk. That's what the code says. So you could put money aside for one of those things, yes,
Okay.
or both of them.
Yeah, both.
That's what you can do. And as to improving the system, the Health and Human Services Commission can look at the city code, and they could recommend changes, and it would come to the city council, and the council could then vote on it at a public hearing.
Now, would that come out of the 80,000, or would we add additional funding to that?
Well, I think the budget, and Bryant, you're the budget man on this. You can tell me what you budgeted for Health and Human Services, but if it's not with, say they want to put 100,000, they want to set forth 100,000, the council can do that, but it would have to come out of a different fund. Is that correct?
And you're talking future years, right?
I think that's the hypothetical, yes.
Yes. So for future, definitely, that's the process we've gone through every year to as far as a priority. We could talk about that. As far as this year, I think it would be part of the 80,000, but we could definitely look at it, yeah.
And may I ask a question as well? If that funding is not used within that year, does it just go back into, it doesn't accumulate, it just goes back into the budget?
Into
That
the
is
budget,
correct.
general
That
And would we
it's-
add to it each year if we're
Could
going
we
to do
not,
that?
as part of the, if we chose to change the ordinance, could we not put a stipulation in there as to what might happen to that money
Or
were
to
it
roll
not to
over.
be used during that particular budget year? Just as a matter of explanation, that particular part of the code was put in because the year that this was being written, we had some nasty rains, ugly, ugly rains, and CAFA Safe House got flooded and was almost uninhabitable. And that was kind of why that was stuck in there. It's a contingency to know that maybe we could have. But of course, at that time, Health and Human Services was $100,000 a year and not 80, if you'll recall, Liz Bryant. But yeah, it was put in there for that purpose. We've never used it, it's never come up, but, you know, there are possibilities here. We have, Councilmember Evans mentioned the stuff that is given to the Boys and Girls Club. They got many, many, many thousands of dollars this spring from both the rodeo group and the marathon group. A lot of money, which I don't think goes on that application because it's donated. It's not solicited funds. So they wouldn't have, so, you know, those are things maybe to add to the application so that you do have a good idea. Well, here's an organization that gets lots of donations from large groups like that, or here's an organization that no large group seems to be doing anything with, and they really need help. So you've got all kinds of leeway there that you can play with this year. I'm really, really looking forward to the outcome, really am.
Krista, did you have something?
Just a question now that Robin had brought that up. Was the fundraising from any of these organizations part of the application, and was it disclosed? Because there was a part where I read that said they were questioned of what other funding sources they received. So was fundraising that they do part of that?
The food bank did disclose additional funds that they got, and believing maybe CAFA also got some.
Yeah.
So,
Yep,
yes.
Have to.
The
Yeah,
Boys
but
and-
it could be a specified question rather than fundraising more, you can figure it out, Mary.
We are planning to meet on the 20th of June, so if anyone is interested in providing input, we would welcome it.
I think by far this was one of the best presentations we've had from the Health and Human Services, and I really appreciated it.
Thank you.
Robert, could you hear everything, and do you have any questions?
I did and I do not.
Okay.
Yes,
Jeff?
no.
Yeah, so, I mean, just to follow up, if, I think we had a couple years ago, last year, actually, one of the entities that was, not granted, because we don't grant money, that was awarded a contract, chose not to use it, and we, as the council, could have allocated that money to one of the other agencies, correct, Brian?
Yeah.
That is correct.
Okay. I just have a couple questions. So with the food bank, the AJ Food Bank, did you talk to them about collaborating with other agencies, other regional food banks to assist in getting additional quantities of food so that they can distribute it to the citizens of Apache Junction?
They did mention that they are working with other agencies, and they also mentioned that they have a plan to collaborate in some educational life skills types of education, which is a new addition to what they offer when people come in for food, that they'll get not just, a box handed, but maybe get additional information that can make them more self-sufficient.
Yeah.
That was new, that I had not heard before.
Right. And then we kind of talked about it last year, and it was kind of in the works, but it's kind of one of these things because of technology, of a collaboration of getting I don't, because there's confidentiality that you have to worry about on this, but when a recipient of the food comes in, to somehow collaborate with the other agencies throughout that serve us or everything, so that people aren't taking advantage and taking food away from somebody else because they go to multiple places and get food?
The Homeless Coalition here is working with that and has had in the past training and has requested agencies to come and then to provide intake information, which would be jointly shared with interagency sharing. And that is something that the commission can explore as well, because I do agree, more collaboration helps us to be more efficient and more effective in the funds that we have.
Yeah, because we have let's face it, we all have a limited amount of resources.
We don't have a bottomless pit. Right.
And we need to make sure it gets to the right people
Absolutely.
and everything. On the Boys and Girls Club, and maybe I can't ask this question, I think it's just numbers I'm asking for, but do we have a number of how many youth are served by the Boys and Girls Club?
It was in their information, let me check.
And is it broke down by, I didn't see anything broke down by age, because one of the things that they're requesting was for teens. And I was wondering, how many teens actually attend the Boys and Girls Club, if that's even a question I can answer or ask.
Here we go.
Okay. I don't want to get.
They currently are serving 46 low to moderate members from Apache Junction with in a daily average of 70 to 75 participants. Their goal is to increase the number of members at least by 10% and increase daily attendance by at least 15% this year. And they may have it in their additional information that's in that thick packet. I can look through that and get you that information as well.
Okay. And then on, that was, maybe I missed it also, but on Horizon, that was, the issue of suicide is very, I can't say very enough, important issue, with not just in our community, but throughout the country and everything else. You know, we continue to see the number of our young people that commit suicide, and so anything that can be done to assist our education people, or just our general public, whatever it might be, to alleviate that is very much needed. Just let me review my notes before I think you answered my questions before during your talk. Yeah. No, I appreciate your presentation. I want to concur with, I think, with Councilmember Rizzi said. This was very informative, and it was very well presented.
Thank you. I have one more thing. According to state health officials, 50 Arizona teens died by suicide in 2017.
Yeah, and there's
Just
so
Arizona
many more
teens.
that
Many
yeah.
more.
The numbers are increasing.
So hopefully we will be at the forefront, because Governor Ducey just passed this legislation. We are on it well before anyone else can touch it. So I commend everyone for your consideration of these requests. Thank you.
Thank you. Presentation and discussion on Arizona State University Project City Spring 2019 semester.
And you're going to go over all
Larry.
234 pages, right?
Yeah. Can we start at the back and
'Cause
go forward?
Yeah, I read them all.
I know, some of you did. I appreciate that. Larry Kirsch, Director of Development Services. I'm here to introduce Maggie Dello. She just graduated with a Master's in Urban Environmental Planning from ASU. With us tonight also in the audience is Ann Richmond, who's Director of the Project Cities program. Steve Russell is the Program Manager. He's here as well. It is a very complex topic. You know, we have 125 mobile home, RV parks, and subdivisions. So there's a large volume of information. And part of the goal of these projects is to tackle a real-world issue. And so I think that gave practical experience to this. You know, later on the agenda, I don't want to steal Liz's thunder, but we're going to talk about Dog Park. That was in ASU Project Cities. A couple weeks ago, we were here to talk about solid waste and the RFP that we're about to issue, and that was a Project Cities program. We're trying to fold in the Project Cities work on sustainability into the general plan as that becomes available. So what you normally see are the final reports. So what was sent to you is really her capstone project that then gets distilled down further by the ASU and Project City. So ultimately, we'll have a report that doesn't have 100 pages of appendices. It'll be there, it'll be on the website, but for tonight, Maggie's gonna come and present, which we invited her to speak because they have a showcase of projects. We, along with the City of Glendale, saw their, about a month ago, their presentation. So Project Cities did a couple projects for Glendale this year. So without further ado, we'll introduce Maggie, and I think it's already loaded on the system, Matt, somewhere. Okay, you're good. Oh, there it is.
We decided to let Glendale get into some of the ASU work here, but we've been very, very happy.
Well, thank you all for having me today. I'm very excited to share with you some of the work that I was a part of this semester. This particular program was very impactful for me, and I'm very thankful to have been given the opportunity to do this. So, as Larry said, my name is Maggie Dello. I just completed my master's in urban and environmental planning this semester, and this was my capstone project. So, I want to first introduce you to the issue that your city brought to my attention and the attention of the Project Cities team at ASU. As you know, mobile housing represents over 50% of the city of Apache Junction's housing stock. At a time when available housing assistance and subsidies do not meet demand, these units represent a valuable source of unsubsidized housing stock for Apache Junction and the United States as a whole. With their affordability as an asset, and while most parks in the city are in great condition, there are some concerns about a number of aging and non-conforming mobile home and RV parks in Apache Junction. There are approximately 125 parks in the city, some of which predate the current city zoning code. In these cases, the properties do not comply with current requirements, but are able to continue operating because the property owners hold rights of lawful nonconformance. However, these park owners are limited in what they can do with their land. They are prohibited from making significant developmental changes, including expansion, or in the case of property destruction, rebuilding. Beyond park nonconformance, a number of individual housing units were built and established prior to HUD's National Manufactured Housing Construction and Safety Standards Act of 1974, which raises concerns of housing quality, health, and safety. Given these circumstances, the city is at a crossroads. Though many parks have poor property conditions or fail to conform to contemporary Apache Junction zoning code, the city also recognizes that they provide valuable, affordable housing opportunities, and thus removal is not an option. So, given the issue at hand and the context in which Apache Junction is working, 3 main goals drove this effort towards the redevelopment of housing and a strategy and solution. First, to preserve or maintain an adequate amount of affordable housing stock necessary to meet the demonstrated needs of Apache Junction's population. Second, to improve the conditions of high-priority parks and increase the quality of life for residents who live there. And third, to promote the redevelopment of parks into alternative affordable housing units when appropriate. So my research process and methods consisted of a literature review, a housing needs assessment of 28 high-priority properties in the city, as well as stakeholder and expert interviews with property owners and professionals working in the affordable housing industry. I'm going to gloss over that, but I'd be happy to answer more questions if you have them at the end. Because of the way that I conducted my research, I split my analysis into 2 distinct parts. The first part explores how mobile housing fills a pronounced affordable housing need in the city. And the second part explores opportunities for the development and redevelopment of affordable housing in the city. I want to share with you a bit of what I learned during my research. First, there is a very wide swath of mobile housing stock, quality, value, and tenure opportunities represented in Apache Junction. No mobile home park or RV park is the same, and housing quality is vast, ranging from the impeccably well-maintained to the undoubtedly derelict. Available stock provides opportunities for both rental and ownership. However, tenants always rent the land from the property owners, which can put them in an even more vulnerable position. Mobile housing in Apache Junction, especially the units rented by those park owners that I had an opportunity to speak with, predominantly caters to full-time residents who are typically reliant on fixed incomes. This is not true for every park, but the extreme affordability of many of the mobile home units tends to attract this clientele. Necessary park improvements for some of the most high-need communities can be financially unfeasible for many of the park owners. Highly affordable rents coupled with the park owner's rights of lawful nonconformance means that owners are significantly limited in what they can do with their land. Necessary park improvements can be cost prohibitive because of that, especially when a park owner is unable to explore development opportunities that would help finance those improvements. Park owners have little incentive to make improvements, while redevelopment and park improvement pressures can ultimately result in park closure and the displacement of its tenants. So this is an aerial image of a mobile home park community that does not currently conform with the zoning code. On this plot of land, the park owner has 8 units that can be rented. With rights of lawful nonconformance, the property owner would be allowed to manage their park in its current condition, even though it's nonconforming. However, in the event of an incident like a flood or a fire that resulted in the complete destruction of units, the property owner would be required to redevelop their land to conform with current zoning. Additionally, if the property owner wanted to redevelop in any major way, they would have to conform with current zoning. This image represents a conceptual diagram of what the plot of land might look like following redevelopment. To conform with current zoning, the property owner would actually lose 1 unit of rentable space. This is problematic to Apache Junction's goals of preserving affordable housing for 2 major reasons. First, a loss of units translates to a loss of income for landlords, which may disincentivize landowners from making necessary land and housing updates that would improve the quality of life for the residents. Second, if a property owner is so inclined to redevelop, even if it means they will lose some rentable space, they will be driven to make up that loss of 1 unit's monthly rent by increasing rent rates across the tenants who persist, which ultimately threatens affordable housing in the city. One last major finding regarding mobile housing as affordable housing is that the success and affordability of a park really depends on the attitudes and business acumen of the park owners and the individuals responsible for managing the parks. I had the privilege of speaking to a number of wonderful park owners in Apache Junction who really take pride in the maintenance of their parks and take their role as a provider of affordable housing very seriously. So one park owner that I spoke with really enjoyed having the opportunity to rent to low-income individuals because they've found that they make really good tenants as long as you treat them fairly. This same park owner mentioned a peer park owner that he knows who doesn't share that same attitude. They see affordable housing and managing a park, a mobile home park or RV park, as a quick way to make money. And so because of that, they make about as much on their deposits as they do on monthly rent because they're cycling through tenants very quickly because they can't keep up with a high rent. So part 2 of my analysis considers the literature review findings and expert interviews with affordable housing development experts. The findings illustrate a number of challenges and opportunities associated with affordable housing development. But in the interest of time, I will speak briefly about the last 2 bullets because this is where I believe the city has the most opportunity. Redevelopment suggests new construction. Interviews suggest that it is extremely difficult to build units that are both new and affordable. The two are diametrically opposed. As a result, successful affordable housing development requires developers to be creative, including strategies like stacking available funds, forward commitment of funds, and the subsidization of housing through revenue-producing development. Other strategies might include the development of alternative housing types that are more inherently affordable, but both methods are extremely difficult for developers to successfully pull off at this time because they're not widespread. The federal government has helped fill existing gaps in affordable housing development through the provision of subsidies and programs, but supply still fails to meet demand. Cities can play an important role in meeting the affordable housing needs of their residents by engaging collaboratively with developers, helping developers understand where the greatest needs and opportunities are for their cities. Additionally, cities can more proactively attract and incentivize affordable housing development by making scarce resources such as land and greater profit opportunities available to developers. I spoke to a few affordable housing developers, and they said that they go where the properties present themselves. So it's very important to make sure that they know what is available for them. Yeah. And so the conclusion of my analysis brings me to 5 main recommendations for the city. First, develop a strategy for housing preservation, improvement, and the promotion of redevelopment of specific housing and properties based on their own specific needs. The city can do this by using 2 typologies that I developed in my needs assessment. These typologies identify the priority level of parks and the park needs and appropriate actions. Number 2, support and invest in mobile home and RV park owners. Many of the interviewed park owners possess a great amount of knowledge and wisdom regarding how to successfully manage parks, but they also indicated that there are knowledge gaps within the mobile home park community in Apache Junction. If the city can harness the experience and insights of individual owners, they can facilitate knowledge sharing between park owners, which can significantly impact the quality of mobile housing and park management across the city. Third, be proactive in attracting and incentivizing developers to pursue affordable and market-rate housing development in the city. Developers go where the needs are, but they are not always aware of what available opportunities there are. The city can proactively communicate Apache Junction's needs and establish a call to action for affordable housing. In addition, affordable housing is aided by the availability of resources, so the city should consider what kinds of resources it could accumulate and make available to developers. 4, create an action protocol for mobile home and RV parks available for sale. Following the sale of a mobile home or RV park, tenants may find themselves and their housing status in a vulnerable position. The city could facilitate opportunities for select parties, including tenants, nonprofits, other Apache Junction Park property owners, and even the city itself, to purchase the property before a landowner officially lists the land for sale. This will provide opportunities to preserve affordable housing and prevent displacement of residents. And my 5th recommendation, which is really the crux of this project, to create an affordable housing development overlay district. So an affordable housing overlay would be applied to non-conforming parks and create opportunities for increased density and decreased setback requirements. In doing so, this would not only incentivize affordable development, but also preserve otherwise threatened affordable housing stock. So I showed you this image before of the 8 units, or the 9 units, in this image of the 8 units with 1 unit removed. If we were to do an affordable housing overlay, we could increase densities to a size that the people living in these parks are normally used to, closer quarters, smaller units. But by increasing densities, we could provide more rentable space for landowners, which provides them with the incentive to make the property improvements that would be necessary for increasing quality of life for residents. And we could maintain the appropriate number of affordable units for the city to meet need. And that's my presentation.
Great job.
You did do a really good job.
You did wonderful work. And I read every page.
Hope it didn't bore you too much.
No, I was very impressed with the overlay. I think overlays are a win-win situation for a variety of reasons. I also was, felt very good about the collaboration between the city and park owners. I thought that was a very workable, non-costly,
Right.
et cetera. We're not looking at having to put out a lot of money to do that. I thought you looked with very nice eyes at some of these places. You called them fair, and I would have gone, ah. But you were very nice about the whole thing and very fair, I thought. So thank you very much for doing this report.
Thank you.
Al, could you get with them and let them know where the recording will be? Yes. Of this presentation? Any other questions? Yeah.
So with the increased number of spaces, that was keeping it a mobile home park and just making the spaces smaller and having, what did that entail? I was a little confused about.
Sure. So it could maintain it as mobile housing. I think in the long term, we don't want to look towards mobile housing as that long-term strategy, just because if it's a problem now, who's to say it won't be a problem 50 years from now? Something that I would recommend would be the development of micro apartments that would be site-built so that they would maintain their value over time and maintain quality over time. So overall, it would be a fair and equitable solution for the residents.
Maybe something on a sliding scale. That's what I was driving at. I'm glad that was your conclusion, because I got a little confused about why we would get. And so my concern is also the same as with these trailers and these mobile homes. They age, and you can't keep putting money into them. At some point, they're, you know, like we talked about pre-HUD and they're are up-to-date codes, and so to make them safe and healthy, healthy, we have unsafe and unhealthy environments continuing to grow as long as those continue to stick around. So I like that idea that you proposed.
Did you, Councilmember Reese, did you see the cost per square foot on the micro homes? I was appalled. I didn't realize they were so expensive.
Right.
I mean, you have in your head, tiny homes, micro homes, and you think, oh, that'll be cheap. Whew. They're not cheap.
Yeah.
Vice Mayor Wilson.
Yes, I realize one of the problems we have today, we have several of the, I'll say, non-conforming places that would love to be able to remove some of the older, mobile homes and replace them with, what's the words for the, I lost the name of them. Park models, yeah, thank you. Bring in park models, but according to our rules, they can't do that. So that keeps them around that
Right.
much longer.
Right.
So I like the idea of being able to, I'm gonna say, allow the upgrading, which definitely needs done, which is open up more of the older homes into actually being used.
Anyone else?
I'm glad you brought up the micro-housing, because to me, that has to be the one new sustainable type housing that could be brought in. But in the parks where you interviewed the people that were the low-income housing, did you ask, or did they offer, did the park own the units, or were they owned by the people that were renting them?
It varied between a few of the park owners that I spoke to. It varies, and I think that's one of the big issues, is that no park is run the same, and so every tenant is going to rent the space, but they might also own their home, which can create problems when a park closes and they have to move their unit and find a new place for it, when their unit might not be accepted at a different park. So,
Some of them can't be moved.
right,
Period.
and
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
they'll
Just
fall
saying,
apart.
it's
Right.
okay.
They can
Well,
be tore down.
As I read through this, and I wish the city could solve all the problems that the people hope the city could solve. But in this particular case, did any of the park owners talk about establishing like a park owner association or something that they themselves could be a better police of and set standards themselves instead of relying on the city to create this for them?
Nobody explicitly mentioned that, but based on my conversations, I think that that is absolutely something that they would be interested in doing. I think the issue is that they don't know what their role could be. And so if that was established for them and they could take ownership of that, I think it would bring all of the park owners closer together with the ability to solve problems.
Have some standards.
Yes, have some standards and solve these things together.
Anyone else?
Can you just retell us again how a property would lose its nonconformity status?
So if units were destroyed, they wouldn't be able to redevelop to the way that it looked before. They would have to conform with current zoning.
Did you is there any study as to which of the parks or how many of our parks are septic or on sewer or anything like that?
Many of them mentioned being on septic still, but I don't have the exact number, if Larry does.
Okay. And then, did you do any kind of a study, or is there a study out there? You know, every community has a median income level of its citizens and such. Is there a level that there's the level of low-income mobile home parks kind of starts to go away when what level of income does that go away? Is there kind of
I haven't seen any.
How high?
I don't know what that would look like. In the report that I produced, I have a number of appendices where I break down the parks by census tract that they're in, and I do a bit of demographic analysis in there. And so you can see the parks that, or the census tracts that have a higher concentration of mobile home parks generally have a lower median income.
Yeah, I was just different cities in the valley. I just didn't know if you'd had any kind of a study of different cities, but, like Chandler or Gilbert or Tempe or Fountain Hills or anything what their level of,
I do not have that.
just interesting fact.
Yeah.
Back to Krista.
I'm good. I was going to ask something, but I'm good. Thank you.
Anyone else? Quite a few more items on the agenda, so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Presentation and discussion on an intergovernmental agreement with ADOT for the procurement of a street sweeper. Shane, do you have a new intern tonight?
Yeah. She's my fan club, my only fan club, maybe. Thank you, Mayor, council members. Good evening. My name's Shane Kiso, Public Works Manager. So tonight I wanted to give the opportunity to present, but open up for any questions having to do with Resolution 1918. It has to do with council action being requested tonight to give permission to the mayor to sign into this agreement for procurement of a street sweeper. And the street sweeper is actually a grant that we applied for, and we got notice late last year that we received. So it's approximately $200,000. We don't know what the amount will be yet, just because it has to go through procurement, and we'll see what the bids come back from vendors. This is, I think, the second or third sweeper we've successfully got through a CMAQ grant, and that is congestion mitigation air quality through Maricopa Association of Governments. Our city share is approximately $15,000. Again, less or more depending on what the procurement bids are gonna be for. Gonna come in, yes. The agreement, which is part of your packet there tonight, it will show you that somewhat of a standard contract, and I say a standard contract that our legal, Joel, we made some comments. They accepted some of the comments, but they didn't because they made arguments of the standard contract. It was developed with MEG. However, some of the legalese language that we thought there was better updated information with the indemnification, for example. I don't think we see it as anything that's a showstopper with moving forward with the language of the agreement. So if you look into the agreement, you'll see the recitals. It gives the details, the purpose of the agreement underneath the grant requirements with detailing the procurement, how they'll go about, as well as the payment and reimbursement of the grant. Some miscellaneous provisions in there. Of course, it has that indemnification language in there I just mentioned. Has a cancellation of 30 days notice if parties decide to cancel. I don't see why, except possibly a non-availability of funds through some type of loss of money at the MEG of the CMAQ monies, which I don't think will happen, but there always could be. And of course, cities' compliance with federal laws. And just a procurement timeline, we're looking to do this back-to-back, so I'm asking for this position, discussion here tonight, but asking as consent tomorrow, and that is to meet to the ADOT procurement timeline that they set forth. So they're looking to do a pretty long solicitation, up to, I think it was 28 days, so they're looking to go through most of June into July. The municipalities or jurisdictions that are participating with this solicitation with ADOT will have August, September, or thereabouts to actually issue a purchase order to purchase that street sweeper, whoever the winning vendor is of the solicitation, which could be multiple vendors. And then we anticipate possible delivery of the street sweeper sometime this next winter. And then per the grant requirements, we would have until May 30th to purchase the sweeper and then ask for that reimbursement to MEG. And that is pretty much it. And
Any
open it
questions?
up to any questions.
One thing that always comes up, we have old equipment, and you'll be diligent in getting this the best deal on getting rid of that?
Yes, sir. Mayor Surtee, part of our street sweepers, this is actually, we wrote this application as a replacement street sweeper, so it would be replacing our oldest street sweeper that we currently have in our inventory. And all of those sweepers that we do have are actually gotten through the CMAQ funding. So actually, as part of the agreement with ownership of the agreement, when we sell this old sweeper, any salvage value is, the federal guidelines is we have to give that portion of the money back. For example, we pay like 5.8% of the value of the sweeper. We will get that amount back in any salvage value, and they take that other 90-some%. We'd have to give back to the federal government with the CMAQ monies.
And I just want to make a statement for anyone who's listening or in the future, that when we do get the monsoons this summer, we have a lot of roads out there, and we can't sweep everybody's street the next morning. Give us time. We'll get to it within what? Within a week? Within, how many miles of road do we have?
Usually after monsoon season, in the first few days, we do a lot of the heavy sweeping, a different type of broom, a heavy sweeper we call it, pushing the dirt off, heavy sediments off to the side. And then this sweeper is what we call like the fine sweepers, and that could be up to a couple weeks after a rainstorm before we could actually get around. And usually the lifespan of a street sweeper is 4 to 8 years, just depending on the hours. And the newer the sweeper is, of course, the better they perform. So we are anxious to get a newer sweeper in to have a better performance with the sweeping that we do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's everything then? Yep. Okay. Presentation and discussion on recommendation by the Parks and Rec Commission for a planned construction of an off-leash dog park. Liz.
Liz, I was trying to get there, but
Okay.
couldn't
Do you
get there
want to do
fast
it?
enough.
Yeah, thanks.
Is it over
I'm
here?
down here. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Liz Langenbach, Parks and Recreation Director. Thank you, Matt. I'm here tonight to share with you the recommendation by the Parks and Recreation Commission. Just a really quick history. I know we've been talking about this topic for a little while now. Many, many years it started, but we've been talking more recently about reinvigorating this topic. And so I just want to do a quick, brief history. But I wanted to mention that if anybody wanted to see more details on all of the things we've gone over the last couple of years, they can watch one of the Parks and Recreation Commission, any of the videos of those meetings, as well as our previous council meetings, and all of our documents are online for viewing. So just a quick history, the quick and dirty few details. 2007, 2008 was when dog park plans at Prospector Park and Silly Mountain Park, those were put on hold due to the downturn in economy, but we had some really robust, wonderful master plans that were adopted at that time by City Council. We just didn't have the money once the economy kind of went downhill to be able to bring those to fruition at that time. Prospector Park was the main one. It had construction documents sitting on the shelf at the time. And Silly Mountain was kind of a future conceptual plan that after Prospector Park was done, that might be the next one that we would do. In April 2018, ASU Project Cities did a wonderful job of just presenting some initial research findings to City Council. We did a lot of research back in 2006, 2007, but wanted to see if some of those things were still true, amenities that were desired, what it looked like in our community, and they did a great job of presenting that to the council in April. In August, City Council directed the Parks and Rec Commission to consider options and make a recommendation. We had several meetings for the Parks and Recreation Commission, and additionally, we visited several different sites. So shared in many of those meetings with the public as well as the commission to visit some existing dog parks throughout the state, as well as looking at the sites that we were kind of interested in looking at. They also proposed a few different ideas of locations that we would want to consider that just weren't our top two. One of the sites that we considered was the County Retention Basin that our former Parks and Recreation Director, Jeff Bell, had in looking at some of those bigger ticketed parks that we had on the table, looking at some other ideas that might be a little bit less costly, as well as other opportunities where we had some great infrastructure already in place. So when it came down to it, we probably looked at and considered, 5 or 6 other viable sites. But the top 3 really were Prospector Park, Silly Mountain Park, and then the county complex. The county complex that we're referring to is on the corner of Superstition, Idaho. So in that county complex, the retention basin there that fills up with water, what do we call it?
Lake Grant, or,
Lake Pinal, Lake Grand, many different things whenever the few times that it rains and fills up. As we looked through many of our meetings, we talked about, went and visited all of these sites, but there were a lot of different pluses and minuses for each location. And you can see all of those here. I'm not going to go over all of them. They all are on BLM land, but the lease or the patent, the county complex actually holds a patent to that BLM land, which means that it's more in their name than it is in the BLM's. That's there for pretty much forever. Ours are both on leased land that, hopefully we'll be looking at in the future for patents. So as you can kind of see some of the different similarities, Prospector Park and Silly Mountain they're beautiful areas. They had definitely all the bells and whistles. They're wonderful parks. We considered internally as staff, are there some ways to phase it so that those projects might be more cost effective? But ultimately, the county complex is still a very, amazingly enough, a big enough area for a dog park to be able to still have 2 sections. It has some existing infrastructure in electrical and irrigation lines that are already there that we can tie into. And then there's a lot of existing mature shade trees. As I shared in our staff report or in our staff memo, there were many things that the commission as well as community members identified as kind of must-haves for the park. And that was grass, fencing, shade, some seating for the individuals, and a water source. So those are some of the big deals. They didn't care as much. Just to get something here, they don't care as much about having a restroom. They don't care as much about some of those, bells and whistles if they could just get something started. So as a result, the Parks and Recreation Commission has recommended the Pinal County Retention Basin. So here is a conceptual drawing only. Back at that time, it's upside down so that I could get my bearings here. The wording is upside down, but Superstition on this side and Idaho Road here. Over here in this corner is the Superstition Fire and Medical District office building, and then the rest of this is the county complex. As you can see with parking, we talked about some of the different issues we've discussed with the county leadership, some of their concerns over the last several years. They have been included at different stages of this idea. And we met with them recently, which is why there's a little gap between our Parks and Rec Commission meeting and this meeting, is just to be sure that it is still a viable option in their mind. And we all agreed that, even some of the small concerns of parking or, there's some busier times at the county that they might want us to avoid. Those might become our maintenance days. So we were able to really talk that there really weren't any big hurdles to be able to utilize that area.
When you're saying they, who are the
county.
decision maker? Who is the county?
We have talked with, over the years, County Supervisor House, whenever the idea was originally first brought about, and that was just in concept. But over the last year, as we even proposed this with the ASU Project Cities as an area to look at, we had talked with Kent Taylor and Greg Stanley. Kent Taylor is the Parks and Recreation Director out there for the county, and then obviously Greg Stanley, the county supervisor, and just asked if it was okay. I'm sorry, what did I just say? City?
Supervisor.
Okay, county manager, sorry about that. We talked with them multiple times just to see if they were okay with us continuing just to explore the idea, and they were very open to that idea.
So we would need a majority of the supervisors to say yes?
So what would happen at this point is that they have pretty much already told us that it would be okay for us to move forward. And so we'll talk a little bit about your guys' next steps and what I'll be asking for direction on. But yes, they will end up taking it for an intergovernmental agreement of some sort for us to be able to use this in this way. Currently, we have an existing intergovernmental agreement with the county. The Parks and Recreation Department does maintain this retention basin that was put here as part of an old agreement. I don't know if anybody noticed, we just planted some new we re-put in some plants, and we're trying to bring that vegetation up to snuff. It's nightmare with that retention basin because it just isn't built properly in the first place. So some of the, I think they're very desirous of that problem being mitigated, and that is included in the cost estimates that we've done.
Robert, do you have your iPad with you? Are you seeing this?
I am.
Okay, thank you.
Couple of other things, and so they have shared with their board, just so that there wouldn't be any surprises, that we'd be sharing it tonight, but you all have not voted yet, so we don't even know that this is your idea that you are interested in. So this is the site that we are looking at right now. Lower cost with all of the basics that we're interested in. It's closest to residents and where our thickest density of residents are. It's an existing city-maintained area. It exceeds the minimum land requirements recommended by the ASU Project Cities report, and it mitigates the current drainage deficiencies.
Which is what they were really worried, that was
Yeah,
their first.
they're very interested in.
Yeah.
The last part of this is just to share with you the likely funding sources. I think a Flatiron Community Park is a great example of an opportunity where we were able to patch together a lot of different funding sources to make something, really awesome become a reality. We do have development fees at this time, and that will still be growing with the houses that are planned. So more than likely, this would be done very similarly to Flatiron Community Park with low to no investment of city general fund tax dollars into the actual construction. We'd be looking at using development fees, grants and gifts, and then our corporate partnership, and then as well as potentially some smaller fundraising events to be able to fund the park. The dollar figure that was attached to this in 2015 was $650,000. We do know that the market has changed pretty drastically here in the last few years, and that number is probably a little higher. However, there are also amenities that were in that conceptual drawing and in those estimates, like a Ramada and some other things that could probably be phased in later in order to keep that cost low and be able to actually fund it with these means. So tonight, just wanted to get your questions, discussion, your input, and then we'll be bringing it back to a future meeting for a council vote. It will not be it will not be this week. We'll come back in a couple of weeks. We'll be asking for you to vote on that this is the location that is ideal for our next steps. It's very important for us to pick a location, because until we have a location and that drawing, we can't go out and really solicit very aggressively for grants or get significant grant funding, as well as our corporate partnerships doesn't take off until people can see what's going to be built. So we'll be asking for your direction to vote on this site per the Parks and Rec Commission suggestion, and to be moving forward simultaneously with the county to go forward and ask for an intergovernmental agreement to be put into place, and then both parties would be signing that. And we would obviously work closely with Joel as well as the county to develop that.
Any questions?
Yeah. So you want to remediate the drainage issue, but that's a retention basin, so, I mean, that's
It's
probably
actually a detention basin. I would love to tell you a major difference in that. The thing that we've learned is that really it is, there's probably several problems with it, but one of the biggest is that it is built too deep. So water technically sits and doesn't get to the drainage channel in order to be able to flow on out. That would all be fixed. So part of the cost is bringing in fill dirt, deciding what that is that needs to be done. It might be dry well, it might be several different solutions, but that is part of the estimate and the cost that I had shared.
And then part of it is like, it says $70,000 a year for, does that include an additional staff to keep the sanitation of the park
So
and all that, or?
we used it I don't know that we would request or require additional staff, but we did in the $70,000, what we incorporated is the time that it costs for that part. So that means either part-time staff that might help, somebody to manage volunteers. There's a variety of ways that we would look at that. The bulk of that $70,000 is truly water, some of the, just maintaining some of those elements that are there, the fencing and all of that. The staff, in looking at what other city parks of this size put into it, is very manageable with the staff that we have currently. It's just a matter of reassigning, certain times of the day for them to go over there. We'd also enlist volunteers and other folks like we do for other things in our programming. This is an area that I think lends itself really well to volunteers because there is a huge support group out there. We visited with Paws and Claws to get their input before our final last couple of meetings with the commission, and so I think we have a lot of great potential partners in the community.
Anyone else?
I just had a.
Your Honor.
If Robert,
It's
Robert.
just- I'm so tickled. I've waited for this for 12 years.
I had-
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
I had some questions similar
Okay.
to Councilmember Struble about, is there like a lifeguard on duty? I mean, like, you know, because
No, so all of the parks that we have visited, none of them have somebody there that's there stationed. There are very common rules at all the parks. Our park rangers have been very involved in, as we just explored this, I took tours with a couple of our park rangers to the parks that they are familiar with, that they work at. So we wouldn't be staffing it, but it would be patrolled like anything else, and we would handle it like we do any other, park in the area. They tend to police themselves in a lot of ways, but there are still challenges that erupt, dog fights or dog issues that we would have to get involved with and investigate. Cameras would be a really good thing to add to help us with that.
and no fees to anyone?
Well, unless we had somebody standing there or we had a donation box, there wouldn't be the possibility of doing fees. So it's not,
Another thing that county islands would use in our city, even though they sometimes
very
look
possibly.
down their nose
Yeah,
at us.
very possibly. So certainly, we're open to exploring those ideas, but all of the city parks that we looked at do not charge fees
Yes.
in general.
I think Robert had a question.
Robert?
Yeah, this kind of piggybacks off, I think, Councilmember Struble. So is there a level, I guess this may be for Joel, of liability to the city with if anything should go astray, no pun intended?
Oh, good.
Ooh, that was bad, Robert.
Yeah,
There'd be probably a joint indemnification agreement for dog fights or actually owner fights, more likely. But we'd have to come up with language that the county would accept.
And so that's for the county.
But we would.
But you're asking about, our liability,
Right.
the city's liability to different things. So and Joel, you
Southwest risk.
add into me, but at all of our parks, there is an element of risk at every single thing we do, our skate parks, climbing wall. And as of now, we did talk with Southwest Risk. They do not require extra coverage for a dog park that I'm aware of. I did talk with Ed Bantel there and asked his thoughts, but there would be signage and there would be rules posted, things that would give people they have a reasonable assumption of risk whenever they enter there. So we would not be technically responsible for a dog fight or a dog being injured by another dog. Those are owner things, unless we failed to post proper rules and enforce those rules when we are on site. So it'd be anything like anything else when we are negligent or when we've done something. Those might be the cases, but
It might be a little more complicated because it'd be on county property. So that's something we'd have to talk about with Southwest Risk as well as the county.
Thanks.
So as far as coverage go, you had brought that up. Is there a difference between like a dog park and an off-the-leash dog park? I mean, is there such a thing? I don't know.
this is an off-leash dog park where people can allow their dogs to be off-leash. In our current parks, we allow dogs, they just have to be on leash. So I would say any dog park is truly an off-leash dog park.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I just want to, yesterday I had the pleasure of spending all morning long at Flatiron, and it was amazing how many owners or dogs and their owners came through the park. And when we were running through the park, my granddaughter always had to point, I mean, unfortunately, people don't maintain themselves or their dogs.
Right.
But this is, as what Councilmember Barker said, this is a needed thing. Every one of them, had to keep their dogs on their leash and be wary of it. And this is just, when we get this thing done, it's going to be a great amenity for the citizens to be using and alleviate some of those issues in our current parks. Well,
Right.
not all of them, because
Right.
they'll still use our current parks, but hopefully they'll not as much maybe.
Right.
When we first started talking about this, one of the things that I had thought that we might look at was there's a county park, where is it? It's like 88 and Superstition back there that's been, there were citizens in the community about, 2-3 years back that had talked about wanting to go over there and clean it up so that it could start being used again. And so I don't know if we've looked at that. I don't know if that was
Staff
something-
did take a look at that area, and really a lot of the sites are they're just so undeveloped that they all might be a great location. If we had $3 million, they would all be really good locations. This one really is the best location just to be able to get it off the ground as soon as possible versus waiting to raise those kind of funds. We just have so many competing needs in our community. And so this is a way to just give people something now. And if things are better later, or if we find other means, it might be super popular and we could raise those kinds of funds for a future site. So yes, we did look at, as staff, that site. I don't believe we brought that one back to the commission, but we looked at Superstition Shadows.
Yeah.
We looked at other areas of Prospector Park as well. And then Mike Weaver also shared some other potential retention basins throughout the city that he thought might be potential ideas.
We'll do something with that place in the future.
Yes,
Super excited.
yeah.
Okay,
That's it.
Robert, we're going to take an 8 to 10 minute break. I don't know if you want to hang up and call back or what. How should we do that, Matt?
However he prefers. He can stay on, or I can call him back.
Yeah, call me back. I'll throw my phone on the charger.
Okay, we're going to take
Okay.
an 8 to 10 minute break.
Now, are you good? Are you good now? Okay.
When you come back, I want to talk to you.
Call the work session back into order. And we're going to go with presentation and discussion on public art and establishment of an arts commission. Heather Patel.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Heather Patel with Development Services. So this item is for discussion this evening. Tomorrow it's going to come to direction to staff. Anyways, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background, what we've been doing, where we've come so far. Back in December, we did a presentation and just briefly talked about establishing an authority for public art, identifying a focus, some potential funding mechanisms, as well as some of the ordinances and policies that would need to be created. Direction to staff was provided to create a public art commission. So this evening, the conversation goes a little bit further, and so ultimately the direction to staff would be to not only create the commission, but also the associated ordinances and things that go along with it, that primarily are about funding. So in this process, there will be 3 basic changes. Volume 1, Chapter 2 is establishing that commission. Chapter 4 is establishing the funding mechanisms, and then Volume 2, Chapter 1 would be changing the zoning code in order for us to implement the fees and have some other requirements for public art in there. So under establishing a commission, you do have a draft public art commission that was placed on your desk. There's a few key things I wanted to go over, just sort of to bring that out there for you to think about. That's what we're going to need the direction to staff on. Is really, what is the role exactly going to be for this commission? Is it going to be a deciding entity, or is it simply going to be recommending to the city council, and then you guys make the final decision? And in theory, that would be on every piece of public art that we would commission. And I do want to point out how it would basically work for public art is we would put out requests for qualifications. And we would say, and I'm just going to use our roundabout as the example. We would say we want to put a piece of public art in the roundabout. we are looking for qualified public artists to submit their information. So the artist would submit, and then the commission would select the artist that we would want to work with. And then we could certainly make that recommendation to the city council, and then we would move forward with some sort of an agreement. Then the process would be is the public artist works with the community and comes up with a concept, and then that is what is commissioned or built or whatever in that space. So it's not necessarily that the commission itself or the city council would have a direct yes or no on a piece of public art. It is more, it's supposed to be more community-based, and so then the community comes around and selects what they want the concept to be and works closely with the artist to make sure that it's something that we like and that represents us. So as we go along, when we talk about funding mechanisms, there's really going to be two different types of public art. Some that would be on private property and some that would be in public property, which would be ours. The private is still going to be visible for the public to see, so a private development would be required to put some sort of public art in a place where everyone can see, versus the public, which is ours in our right-of-way and things of that sort. So in theory, we could look at it in two different ways as well. We could say, okay, the commission would have final authority over what goes on in the private, and then the city council could have final authority for all of the public because it is ours, or, you know. So there's just a variety of different ways that we could look at this. If the commission is the final, well, is the final authority, there would have to be some sort of appeals process in case somebody wanted to file some sort of appeal, and then it would ultimately come up to the city council for the final decision based on whatever that appeal might be. The focus of the commission, we want to make sure that we are clear that it would just be a public art commission. So we would not focus on like the existing, excuse me, the existing art program that goes on here at City Hall with the rotation or the movement of the art. It would not go into programming within like the library or Parks and Rec or anything like that. It would not participate in the community theaters. We have two in AJ, and so there wouldn't be any connection there as far as the commission telling anybody to do anything. Events like art shows wouldn't be the focus of the commission, as well as any education. So it is proposed, excuse me, that it be a 7-member commission that serves 3-year terms. And so we have broken down there how that would look. 2 of the members would have to be a practicing artist, 2 members practicing designer, architect, or historian. 1 member would be a business representation, regional, somebody that has some support of the arts in arts and culture, and 1 member in the city who has an interest in arts, and then 1 member who has some sort of expertise in arts. And that one's a little bit more broad. The duties of the commission, these are also what are being proposed, is to promote and encourage citizen participation in public art. So again, as I mentioned, when we do an RFQ, it's going to be very critical that the community comes and participates in that dialogue and discussion of what the final art product would be. Assist, as I mentioned, it will be in private development, so work with the developers to figure out ways to get art in their project. Provide information, of course, to the city council and staff on public art. Certainly make sure that it aligns with the council's mission, vision. And serve, here's where it was sort of split up, serve as the deciding body on public art relating to the private development. And then the next one is recommend the operating and capital improvement program budgets for public art, and conduct qualification process, so the RFQ process, the commission would be the entity that would conduct that. And then review any gifts. So there are some communities that get, Fountain Hills is one example that our consultant shared, is that they had gotten a whole bunch of different art pieces from someone, and then that person left and they didn't know what to do with all the art. So it was sort of a thing. And it was like a bunch of little ones everywhere. Anyways, so just reviewing those sort of things. The next big change would be Volume 1, Chapter 4, the funding mechanism. So there are essentially two types of proposed funding methods. So the first would be art and private development, where 1% of the total construction costs would be set aside for public art. And the developer has three options. They can choose to purchase the public art in that equivalent, put it on their project where it is seen by everyone. They would own it and they would maintain it. The second option is that they would say, well, you know, you can have this space on my project, but you need to find the art. And then the commission would find the art, and then the city would ultimately own it and maintain it. And then, of course, money would be set aside in order to do that maintenance. And then the third option, the developer would say, well, you know, I really don't have room for art on my project, or it wouldn't fit, or whatever the case is. You can just have the 1%, and then you can put that towards a project in a public place. Again, in a public place, of course, the city would own and maintain that. So then the second option is the art in public places, which would be the city's right-of-way. These usually are under capital improvement projects, and we would set aside 1% of the construction costs for putting art into a project. So like when our consultant was here, I think she gave a lot of examples of like bus stops or park and rides and things like that where art was infused, and that was a percentage of the total construction cost. Again, the commission would conduct the RFQ process, and then we would, of course, have to set aside some maintenance in the total project. So Volume 2, Chapter 1, this is the zoning code, and this is just a list of all the things that we would be addressing or want to address within the zoning code. This really gives us the authority to implement the program. So the money is going to be identified, and then this will then give us the permission to actually use that money for the public art. We would, of course, identify how we're calculating those fees, the 1%, what are going to be those eligible costs. We would talk about the applicability of public art and what does that mean. You know, we want to look at things like environmental concerns, cultural concerns. How are the product going to be installed and maintained, the materials that are used, is it appropriate for our area? Obviously, with the Arizona sun, certain products are not recommended. So there's just a list of different things that we would be including in that zoning code. What our planned schedule is that in July, we would want the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider the zoning code changes. In August, we would present all three of those to you. In September, you could approve just two of them. The one with the fees does have to have a 60-day posting period in order for the fees to come into effect, and we would propose that those would come into effect in January. And then November, your final consideration of the Volume 1, Chapter 4 for the fees, and then in September, I guess, is usually when the commissions are asked for applications, and then November, a commission would be seated. So that's roughly our schedule. So again, tomorrow night, it's going to come before you for direction to staff, looking at establishing the commission and any of the two associated ordinances and zoning codes. Do you have any questions?
I do. So on the criteria to be on the board, I think that is, in a perfect world, that's a pretty good mix. if we can come up with that, but we all know how hard it is
Yeah.
to fill these boards.
I think we all highlighted that.
I think we all.
And if I read this correctly, only one person must be a Apache Junction resident, because a lot of artsy people live up in the hills, and so is the way you interpret it?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And if it gets to be November of 2019 and we're struggling, can we open that up until what do you see happening there, Joel?
Open it up for,
I mean,
The membership.
what if we get a couple people that aren't really artists, but they're like fantastic fundraisers and acquirers of stuff? It'd be ideal, hey, we want that guy on the Arts Commission. How would we deviate from this criteria?
well, you can't deviate. Once you set this in code, it's in code. And if they don't meet these requirements, then they can't be on the commission. So you may want to play with some of the language.
Yeah.
You may want to
We
play
need
with
to
some,
broaden that a little.
Yeah.
and you can do that.
Maybe we all need to think, hey, this is ideal of what we want, but if not, open it up.
Well, some of the
Built-in flexibility.
practicing
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
kind of a,
Maybe somebody hasn't picked up a
yeah,
brush
right.
for 20 years.
And maybe somebody, like a historian, define. I like history, I write about it, am I a historian? What is that? An art historian? Yeah, there's expertise in visual performing arts. I love it. What do you call an expert? Is that the guy who clowns around in front of his Facebook, or is that?
Picasso or Monet.
No,
Right.
and I don't think anybody wants any mimes on here, right?
Well, that person, a mime, would be an expert in visual performing
true.
arts.
You wouldn't have to listen to
You
them.
betcha.
We could change expertise to interest, like the 5th bullet down, where it says a member in the community with an interest. I mean, I think that makes it a little bit more.
I think it broadens it enough
Yeah.
that perhaps you can pull more interested
Yeah.
members on board.
So I think we'd all like to see that broadened, and then the council just needs to be, let's put the people that fit this first, but if not, we can check off to.
We can do that.
Anyone else?
Would
I have-
somebody tell
I have a
Gail Evans to
question.
stop talking to him?
Robin?
The proposed 1%
Yes.
of the, yes,
Yes.
she says. Well, I'm not asking the same question you are, Gail, because I already asked that when she brought it up the first time, if you'll remember. Will the developer who decides that they don't have room on their property, but they'll just give that 1% to the Art Commission will they have attribution for their gift? Because that's kind of a selling point, if you're gonna charge them 1%.
I would like
To tell them that, hey, your name's gonna be down there, that you donated this.
Would that be up to the
city.
council? I would like to see that, for sure.
I think it's a selling point.
Okay.
Well, if a developer chooses to give the 1%, we could bank that money and build a bigger piece, and
Yeah,
so
but we could say 3 people
on there.
contributed to this,
Yeah, I'm
or
not-
22, or a performing arts expert.
I think it would depend on the project. Like, if it was the roundabout, I think that would be a little moot, because nobody would see a
But
plaque
it
that says
doesn't
it,
matter
but.
whether they see it,
That's true.
don't you understand?
That's true.
Getting the pat on the back is all that matters.
Yeah, I mean, we could totally include that, absolutely.
Kind of neat.
Gail?
Go ahead, Gail.
Okay. So, art in private development, is that just new development, or someone moves into one of our strip centers? Are they gonna be charged this 1%? Or just totally new projects?
New,
New what?
But
New projects.
correct? Does Larry want to chime in?
New builds.
New
Well,
The ordinances we looked at, there are thresholds, so if you're above a certain square footage, If it's residential, it's over so many units, 15 or more units, so that all gets spelled out in the zoning code. But it won't be for somebody just, moving into the old Fry's that you have to now do public art. So it'll be for new construction, and there will be some thresholds that you'll get to look at. That's how all these ordinances work, so that the smaller projects, it's like an unfair burden, so if you meet a threshold, then you're gonna contribute.
So this is, tomorrow night they'll give us just direction to staff to go forward and in concept,
these
develop
three
ordinances that
codes.
they'll see and be able to give more input on and more suggestions like.
Right, the nitty-gritty of the way the ordinance reads and who has what art history major or whatever you want to do, that's all going to come back to you. And in the zoning code is how these other cities have done it as to what type of project requires you then to contribute for the public art. But it's basically commercial and multifamily, typically over a certain number of units.
So that counts by the number of units, but say, I don't know, we got this giant big box that came in. Are they gonna be charged 1%, or has anyone done it with this size to this size of project is 1%, but this size to this size, then it's 0.5%, because if not, we'll be getting, and I wouldn't mind having $1 million art projects, but to be realistic about it, what would the exceptions be that they didn't have to contribute at least a portion?
You could have a sliding scale if that's what you prefer, so that someone doing an $11 million, $15 million Fry's, it's a certain threshold, or not to exceed a certain dollar amount. So you could say, well, 1% of $15 million is still what, $150,000, I think. So maybe that's not enough maybe that's okay for a $15 million project.
So
1%'s easy to administer. Once you start getting into sliding scales,
Right.
yeah,
then it's like,
Well-
where do you do the break point?
And how do you determine?
So that, okay, now you're $15,001, well, then it's now it's 0.5% or something like that.
so
So
if we have this big industrial box come in, do we want the art in the industrial box area? Or is there gonna be an identified area to start with, within the city?
So it depends, again, if on a site plan, so let's use a 40-acre hypothetical development on Baseline and east of Idaho and Winchester, maybe it's on that corner, maybe it's on the northwest corner of Baseline, so that more public is going to see it rather than some internal street. But again, those are probably enumerated in a zoning code as to working with a developer, saying, okay, we're going to develop this 40-acre M4 or B4 industrial park, and so we'll get together with them and figure out where the best place for the public art is. Or they'll decide, you know what, public art and light industrial, we'd rather see it at the roundabout.
Okay.
So
They'll get to decide whether they want to participate, and during the plating process or development process, we'd work with them on where it would be, as long as it, visible to the public.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, go ahead.
Brian, yes, go ahead, Robert.
Well, there's an old saying, I might not know art, but I know what I like. So, as far as the qualifications for being on the commission, now, correct me if I'm wrong, Apache Junction is going to take on some of the financial burdens of the upkeep of these things, and I'm assuming we are also funding the whole commission in a sense. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, what,
There's no.
So,
Yes.
so the taxpayers are funding this commission, so I would like to see more than one Apache Junction resident on this commission. And I might be a little confused here, but when we're talking private placement, so the commission has sole authority over the private placement. We're not talking about front yards, right? We're talking about private businesses and things like that.
Correct. It would be for commercial and multifamily development. So at the entrance to their project, they would put this, or in a place that they think is appropriate next to a fountain or whatever it may be. So it's not, so let's say it's a residential. So let's use Lennar for an example. So it wouldn't be anywhere on the internal street for Lennar. It was probably going to be at their entrance to the subdivision, and not the one over on Colt Road, but the one over on on Goldfield.
Gotcha.
So it's for the larger subdivision, not, placed inside the development.
And then I have just a comment.
And again,
also.
we have to even decide, I think part of the thing we decided was, are we even going to make it apply to residential subdivisions, or do we only want to make it apply to commercial multifamily? So that's something I think we internally haven't exactly figured out yet. Does it make sense to have it for residential subdivisions?
Krista?
I agree with Robert with the number of residents, but also, are we going to consider the length of residency? Are we going to consider somebody that just moved in last week to Apache Junction, or would that also be a consideration as far as the required residence, the length of residency? How long have they been here? Just something to think about.
Right.
That's up to the council that nominates, I think.
Would the commission, on all everything, would the commission have the ability to go out and search for grants for additional funding of that nature, or no? Is that something that?
Staff would.
Yeah, so one of my
Staff would.
one of my concerns
Oh, go ahead.
is that we have a plan at the staff level. One of the ideas that we're always going to be able to do more with less is a concern of the city manager. And that's why I was really glad that Councilmember Schroeder brought up the idea that there's cost. There's cost to maintain and there's cost to staff. If you look across the board, every single board and commission has a staff member. Liz has to oversee Parks and Rec, Spencer, so we don't have a arts department. So right now, we're doing our very best and they've all got full-time jobs, and so I'm thinking 2 or 3 years, if this gets rolling and going good, we're gonna have to consider at some point somebody to help staff. We have Health and Human Services Commission, we have someone that always is kind of overseeing this. So we don't know exactly, but we know what we want, we know the vision, we know that this is what we see at Oro Valley or we see at these cities. So anyway, I just want to make that point as we go to remember that part of the puzzle.
To start, would it be the Parks and Rec department that would, not
Well,
that staff?
It would start with Development Services and Heather, as we work with the fees and the money and the development process as developers. At least that's what the model we've seen, right, guys, with
Yeah,
Oro
we did
Valley.
ask the consultant to say, okay, unbiased approach, how do cities do this? Unfortunately, it turned out that that's going to be in development services, not that we are artists or know everything. The zoning aspect, I think, makes sense. That's how people have done it, and so that part of it can make sense. But it could evolve to where it could be, a different department, so. But generally, it sounds like it kind of rolls within development services.
And then the nexus there is tied to development projects.
Right.
And so that's where, if they have to talk to 2 different departments when they're going through it, one department about 1% of their project funding and a certain staff and a certain culture, and then they also have to work through the whole development process over here, it could cause confusion.
And we're like
So it makes
Robert, we
sense.
know what we like, so we know what art is.
So, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
so, this might be kind of a silly question, but, could there be some sort of percentile? As far as, public and private, or is it just come one, come all? Before you know it, the word gets out, every artist in the valley is gonna wanna display their art somewhere, we tripping all over it. It could be something like, hey, you know what, we got a private sector here, 30% of the art in the city's gotta be in the private, or that doesn't have to be, but, and then 70% in the public. I like the idea of culture through the city, artwork displayed in certain areas of the city, that's a fine idea, and even in some of the sponsored areas in your private industry. But if it turns to the point where it's like the private industry is making up 80-90% of the art through the city, then that it starts to get out of control. You see what I'm saying?
I think that would be a very pleasant problem to have, to have too much art, because right now we have zero. So,
Absolutely.
All of it would come through the commission or council, however you finally decide it. So again, you just want to be careful of who you'll accept art for. Is it appropriate? Does it meet our community standard, however that's defined? So again, you can always come back and amend these ordinances if something's not working, so.
Commission would be deciding that, correct?
But that's what, we've laid it out here. They could, or it's either the selection, if you put out the RFP, the contract might come through here, or you could have the commission be the final arbiter of the art through a public process where the public's invited to talk about the cultural aspects of what type of art is appropriate to a specific setting in the city. Or you could have the council be the final decision-making authority saying, yes, here is the piece of art, council, here how it's, and here's where it's gonna be placed, and you could say yes or no. Again, as a commission member, you gotta decide or think about, as a commission member, why are they on the commission if they're, a lot of our commissions are recommending body. We saw a commission here tonight, they're a recommending body. That's typically how it works, but that's perfectly up to you. Do you want them to be just a recommending body, or do you want them to have the final say-so? That's ultimately your decision.
But there would be public hearings if it this was decided to come before the council, there would have to be
So if there's an
public
appeal,
hearings,
say,
so-
yes, so say you have the commission as the final deciding body, but someone didn't like it, then we always have an appeal process hardwired into the code.
Anyone else? Still have a lot to do tonight.
But you
So,
saved the best for last.
Yeah.
Or this- no, this was
We've
the
been
best.
working
I'm
the
sorry.
lot, this is
Yes.
the best, yeah.
Yeah, this is.
okay, so we will talk about this again tomorrow.
Good stuff,
Yes.
good stuff.
Yeah,
Thank
it's on
you.
for council direction to staff.
We need to
Okay.
order pizza.
Presentation and discussion on proposed ordinance number 1476, amending city code in development services. Larry and Dave. This is-
Mayor and council, I believe we can do all three of 6, 7, and 8 together.
Let me read the other two then. Presentation and discussion on Resolution 1914, declaring a public record for a document filed with city clerk. And then 19243, presentation and discussion on ordinance number 1475, amending Apache Junction Code, buildings, repealing and replacing. Now we're doing all three.
Thank you, Mayor, council, for the opportunity to come back with the administrative code changes and the building code adoption of the 2018 codes. For the administrative code, we're going to be moving from the 1997, year 1997 to 2019. And I think there are some good things that we've put into the administrative code to make it more applicable, to make it more specific and more helpful, give more guidance to our developers and people getting permits, and just a better process and explanation to those things. I believe that there were some questions a couple of meetings ago when we were talking about some of the exemptions, and I know that we've addressed one for the horse shades at 200 square feet to allow those to go in without permits, and then also addressed a concern about what HVAC needed permits, and we had included some extra language there to take some of those out of the permitting process. I don't know if there will be any new questions about administrative code, but I don't think there's been a lot other than that's changed. So for the commercial codes that we're looking to adopt, it'll be the International Building Code, International Fire Code, International Existing Building Code, International Energy Conservation Code, International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, and then ICC 117.1, which is the accessible and usable building and facilities. So all these codes are done and overseen by government officials and other engineers and architects. They all participate, and those are done about every 3 years through a process, a consensus process. So this is, they're working now in the 2021, but I think getting in on the 2018 is a good thing. We're also, as part of the commercial, we'll have an international mechanical code, international plumbing code, international fuel gas code, and the national electric code. So in commercial construction, you break out the pieces and have, so an electrician typically, all he really wants to know is his code related to his electrical. So for residential, they decided that it was better to, and more productive, to put all of the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, building structure stuff in one code. So that way a contractor that builds houses gets one book. He's got all the information he needs to go with. The International Swimming Pool Code has both commercial regulations and residential regulations. Deals with sizing and safety things, the Virginia Graham Act for suction issues and stuff like that. So that's why we want to bring that on. It also includes all the barrier requirements. So around the valley, the 2018 Who's Who, other cities that have already adopted the 2018 are Avondale, Cave Creek, Chandler, Glendale, Mesa, Phoenix, Tempe. There are a couple others that are in the process. So in summary, and then I'll answer questions that you may have specifically. Adoption of the 2019 amendments to Apache Junction City Code Volume 1, Chapter 7 buildings. We get a new administrative code. We have adoption of the most current building and safety codes, and this will improve efficiency and effectiveness and continue to provide safety to the life and property in Apache Junction. And so our recommendation for tomorrow night is that we ask that the mayor and council adopt the document 2019 amendments to Apache Junction City Code Volume 1, Chapter 7 buildings. And that'll include the administrative code provisions and the adoptions and amendments to the specific codes. And so if you want to I don't want to run through a bunch of stuff you don't want to hear about, so I don't know if you have any specific questions on the codes themselves, any of the amendments.
All right, Chip is getting ready to.
I didn't see the attachment.
And you had mentioned part of mine was the aspect is, I'm going to say the 120 square foot for requiring a permit. Is that being addressed in these right here?
Right. So in section 716 permits, which would be page 15 if you have the printed document.
And Mayor and Council, just to let you know, it wasn't attached to the agenda. We sent it to all of you on May 30th, which it was was that a Thursday? Yeah. An email. So it was an attachment to an email that you all got then.
Yeah, and that's how I feel. I feel kind of in the dark because I didn't see it.
Okay, we sent it to the regular mayor, city and council email on the 30th.
I looked for it attached to this.
Okay, yeah.
Because my question is, for example, and of course I've done a little, I won't say contacting, in Pinell County, it's 200 square foot. In Maricopa County, in the county itself, it's 200 square foot. I went to Costco. They have one of these that's sitting on display that is a 14 by 10 foot, which is 140. This ad right here is showing 168, which is a 14 by 12. Pardon?
You want to put it on the overhead?
I don't care.
Do we?
But, and I've looked at several others, and they're talking about gazebos and the aspects on it. Not only just shades, but just, that these things are out there, and if you are wanting to do something in your backyard, to go with the, I'll say, amenities that you have in your backyard, and you purchase this, and there's no engineer's drawing on it. I went and looked at the booklet that comes with it. It tells you how to put it together, period. There's nothing on it. So you'd be spending, in this case, it's basically $2,900, and now you'd have to go get an engineer's drawing accomplished on it, which is going to cost you, I've gotten prices anywhere from $200 an hour to $1,500 to better than $3,000 for doing an engineer's drawing. Really, can we work with expanding it to meet the county so that we are having identical rules in the city for a situation like this?
Your Honor, that for me is a public policy question. And so I think the question should be amongst you all. That, to me, I don't know what we're proposing, but from my standpoint, from our perspective as a staff, is that is simply something, if you want it to be the Pinell County code, tell us, and we'll update our recommendation.
What is currently going to be on the books right now, is it still 120?
for this type, for just a ramada at somebody's house. But, you know, like I said, we do allow, or we measure that based on the configuration of the post, not the overhang and that. We did put in a provision for horse shade structures that reads, a horse shade structure, and this is what is exempt from permits, a horse shade structure not exceeding 200 square feet in area, not exceeding 10 feet in height to the midpoint of the roof, not closer than 6 feet to other structures and in compliance with all zoning requirements. The structure cannot be served by more than 2 20-amp circuits installed per code and cannot have any plumbing except a mist system or a water line protected by an approved backflow prevention device serving a hose-connected outlet and installed in compliance with this chapter. The horse shade structure must be constructed in compliance with the manufacturer's instructions applicable to the horse shade kits per design approved by the City of Apache Junction or per the chapter. So that's what we had put in for the horse shade structures, kind of trying to acknowledge the space and coverage. For right now, as far as just a storage building, possibly Ramada and stuff, we have 1-story detached accessory structures not exceeding 120 square feet in area, not exceeding 9 feet in height to the midpoint of the roof, not closer than 6 feet to other structures, and in compliance with all zoning requirements. The structure cannot be served by more than 2 20-amp circuits installed per code and cannot have any plumbing except a mist system. The structure cannot contain habitable space. So if you wanted to amend that part to a larger number, the one factor is, and I don't know what the magic number is at what point these things are going to be flying all across town. So that is the consideration you have to take in, is that these become mobile, especially, you know, something that isn't held down with stored stuff in it or your tractor or stuff like that. But I don't know what the, you know, the threshold's going to be and, you know, what we're going to be dealing with. I know we saw quite a bit of debris from the storm where we had the damage at the apartment complex. A lot of the aluminum awnings and stuff got blown around. A couple of building, you know, we had one horse barn that actually collapsed, the whole barn collapsed. So, you know, I'm open to it. I just want to make sure we've taken into consideration, you know, other
And
things.
I think those microbursts can happen anywhere too. I mean, even if you are, I think in that list of cities that you showed, I think only Gilbert is the only one that has horses, right, on some horse properties, Chip?
Yeah, well, Mesa has
Mesa
some too.
has some.
And so does Avondale. And
I'm looking at,
Tempe has a
this
lot.
is
They'll
a
have horses.
$3,000 piece of roof and structure. There's no way in heck I'm gonna spend $3,000 and not make sure that this thing isn't gonna pick up in any old wind and blow away.
But Dave, didn't you say the horse shades could go up to the 200 square feet?
Dave
which
has
is-
written in an
That's- I think
exemption.
we're
What
just-
we understood was that, Mr. Wilson, you wanted an exemption because there were letters to the editor about horse shades. So to be horse-friendly, Dave created an exemption for up to 200 square feet. So that's the way
that
it
meets
current.
the count.
So that's, I think we did satisfy that request. If you're talking about any other building more than 120, again, that's a different policy matter as to whether you want all accessory buildings under 200 square feet. They still have to meet a building code, whether you're not. This has to meet a building code. That's, I think, what it says. But whether you want that to apply to all accessory buildings, that's another discussion, or to change that other paragraph that Dave mentioned.
And one thing to consider is that this is beautiful. This looks great, probably will work just fine. We'll get some variation of that you're not gonna like. And, you know, that's cobbled together, or however you wanna put it. And I think those are the ones that become problematic, you know, where it's well, we had the person that came in and proposed for a garage that they would cut the front and the back of an RV off because, hey, it'd make a perfect place to store my Trans Am. So, you know, those are the things that are the other side of the issue. So just something to consider. So
The other thing that we talked about was coming up with some standard plans. So if there was engineering, we do hand out samples, cut sheets, if you will, of how trusses should be for certain types of things. Again, if the council wants to go further and say, okay, like right now, I think we've written it so it's up to 200, but it's only for
Yeah.
horse shade structures.
Not
If
just-
you want to go other than that, then I think then there's different, and again, this code, we can come back 6 months or a year from now and say, okay, we want it to apply to all accessory structures. There are some cities that did go to 200 square feet, as Dave has told me. I don't know which ones they are, we could certainly find out, but they're now coming back, that number, whether it's 120 or 144 or some even number or 200, some cities are questioning whether every accessory structure without a building permit is 200 the right number. So some are actually coming back to a smaller number, like 144 or some other number. But right now, we have no limit either on the number of accessory structures you can have in your backyard. So we have seen photographs where someone has 4, 5, 10, 120-foot sheds in their backyard, and then they start tethering them together and things like that. So again, those are perhaps the exception, but right now we have no limit on the number of 100. So even though we say you don't need a permit, you can, as long as you can fit it and meet setbacks, you can have more than one 120 square foot structure.
But so in those cases, the issue isn't so much that the number that they have, the issue is that they're tethering them together,
They become
which
code cases, yeah.
can then be addressed. And you said possibly people living in them, which can then also
Shared a
be
picture
addressed.
today, I think, of Brian Temet,
Okay.
of somebody living.
So, but we have mechanisms for addressing that. My question for Chip is, does the county, you often talk about the size of the structure that the county has. Do you know what the county requirements would be for tying something like this down, or is there a requirement?
The way I understand it, and of course, I've reached out to the county and I've gotten half-assed responses from them, and I emphasize half-assed. They will say, as long as you're following the installation rules and, proper, of course, securing the structure to say to the ground, that's what they're talking about. But I was asking other questions, and that's the only one I really got an answer to. But, and of course, in reading the manual on this, yes, this is bolted to the ground. Yes, they tell you how to bolt it and what type of a base to put it on. So it's not just sitting on top of the ground in the aspect on it. And of course, that's important, that you spend $3,000, you want to make sure that it's going to stay, that you're not going to let it blow away. But I just wanted to emphasize the fact that these things are available out there, and some way of avoiding the requirements that all of a sudden you have to come up, with an engineer's drawing on it, which can be basically double the cost of something on this. And that's where I had said in the aspect on it, and my offer is still there. Heavens, I will help contribute to going out and getting a general drawings as to what can be used and how, even like an outdoor gazebo like this can be done without the additional expenses of going out and getting an engineer's drawing. Because majority of them, they have to come, if you have it up, they have to come to the site and go through and verify. Even when one that I talked to said that, well, yeah, you can give me the manual for the installation, and I will use that, but, he says, really and truthfully, he says, I need to see one to be able to finish it out, because even the manual's not enough information for him.
Your Honor?
Yes.
So the two of you, do you see a problem with having an exemption for horse shades different from gazebos? Someone coming in and saying, well, they use this for a horse shade, I want to use it for a gazebo or a covered patio in my backyard. The horse people don't have to get a permit or show any drawings. Shouldn't it be consistent for all of them? or we're gonna have another issue with someone.
And that's legitimate. I think I would need to rework it so that we would be dealing with something that doesn't have walls or, that it's limited. The challenge with these is though they don't have walls, they're actually harder to make structurally sound because you're dependent completely on that post or then the bracing. So a building that has walls is a little easier to make structural because it's got the walls itself. But I think we could come up with some definition that maybe for Ramada's open-sided structures and that kind of thing that, they would be covered. I kind of see your point that it's not fair just for the horses, so.
Yeah, that could be used in multiple situations.
Right, the thing we run into is where PVC with a tarp on it. So again, I think there's some other things we need to clean up to make sure, because we do see a lot of that. Right now, this is written, so again, it's really just we have a lot of regulations that only apply if you're 1.25 acres and above.
Right.
So we get questions, well, why do I have to have 75% of my accessory building covered with something other than stucco, but if I live in RSGR, I can have a big red barn? We get that question all the time. So right now, we do have regulations that are different, but it's certainly going to be a question, well, why do they get to have a 200 square foot gazebo without a permit, but I can't?
Right.
So
You've seen those.
we do have regulations that are different if you have 1.25 acres.
Yeah.
So that's what our thought was here, is that this regulation would apply if you have a horse property, it's a shade structure, there has been concern about horses standing in the heat, whether some like to stand in the heat, we understand, and others like shade, so. We were just trying to address what we were asked to address.
Yeah, I've seen some dogs that are bigger than some horses.
Miniature horses.
Yeah, miniature horses.
Yes.
So are there any other questions I can answer or any more information you want guidance-wise or?
Just the other item, I don't want to not talk about it, but, so we did leave in here, I've sent a couple emails about fences and how high they should be. Right now, it's 3 feet. If you want to keep it at 6, that's certainly up to you. I gave arguments. There are arguments on both sides. Some city, I think it's 3 feet, 3 inches. I don't know where they came up with that one. So some cities regulate fences over 3 feet. Some are over 6 feet. There's no right or wrong answer. I gave you some situations where I do think it's helpful for us primarily to preserve right-of-way. So I gave you an example on Broadway, one on Idaho. It's in here at 3 feet. If you want to change that, again, you got to know by tomorrow night, so.
I think that since several didn't get the email, I don't know that they're going to be ready to.
Yeah, we can tell you what page that's on, but right now, just for full disclosure, right now it says 3 feet. But if you want to keep it at 6, that's certainly your prerogative, so.
I think the conversation that we had, and I did what you did send, I don't know if the other council members got it, but I did get way back when you did send the different cities and what their different fence heights were. The majority of them actually had the 6 foot. There weren't many that had less than 6 foot. And so that's definitely a sticking point for me, but I would agree with the mayor, being that it wasn't attached to the agenda. I need some time to look through it. We've had one crack at it, but I haven't had a crack at this one. It was in an email, it wasn't attached to the agenda, and before I say yes or no or anything, I want time to read that, so.
I did just forward it again, Mr. Mayor. There's some limitations with the system and some legal considerations when amending agendas or adding items, so that's why we thought appropriate in email, but we'll seek ways to improve that process in the future if there are late items, how to make sure you know about it. So we apologize for that.
On the fence issue, and this is not necessarily over the size of fence and anything, for clarification, yes, I live on the large lots. I have 1.25 acres, and I want to put my horses I want to build a round pen to put my horses in for exercising. I don't have one, and I want to construct one. Is that going to require a permit?
No. We're talking about fences that are property.
Boundary fences.
Boundary fences,
We're
yeah,
only
property
talking
line
boundary
fences.
fences. That's
Correct.
what I wanted to make sure I was clear on.
Yep.
That we're only talking boundary fences, we're not talking about Interior.
That would be a writing pen. Right, we're just talking about property boundary fences.
And so, the one email that I got with all the different cities, they all required permits.
No, I think there was a couple that
Was there a
didn't.
couple that didn't?
Well, one required a permit for any size fence, any height
Right,
of fence.
right.
And I forget what city that was, but I think by and large, and
The
I could go
majority of
redo it and give you an average or, but I think majority of them required a permit, then it was whether it was 3 feet or 6 feet. And then there was one that required no matter how high, and I don't know what their
Right,
definition was, it was kind of vague as to what height it was, actually.
And was it, and I'm trying to remember, was it different from the front yard for the right-of-way? Or was that just for the?
Some cities
rear?
deal with for a rear yard, there is no permit. If you're just gonna put a fence between you and your neighbor for both of your backyards, I think it was over 6 feet. But in the front yard, that's where they're trying to regulate it mostly.
To keep it
That's
out
where
right
you would,
away.
right,
And visual.
yeah. And there's some other things that we can do. We're gonna be bringing zoning code back for a lot of reasons, but one for the arts, but I think we have to make it maybe more black and white about this incident we had on a certain street where they just put it in the right of way. So I think our zoning code could be clarified to make it more black and white as to where you cannot put it. The whole issue becomes where then in this whole FPE issue is where folks are putting fences in an FPE. And again, we can't stop them necessarily, but at least it allows a conversation to say, you know what, Broadway is going to be a 100-foot right-of-way someday, and now we're going to have to buy or pay to move that fence back if the time ever comes. That's kind of where I'm just forward-thinking, you know, if we need to do that.
We would have to pay for it?
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, if there's a fence that's on their property, we can't tell them not to put a fence in an FPE. I think that's what our practice has been, but it's their property, then there are setbacks. Again, if they meet the setbacks, they can put the fence at the property line. I'm not saying somebody would do it in the middle of the road, because of this particular property in Idaho, I think the property line is the middle of Idaho Road. We have seen that on Winchester.
Well,
So-
Goldfield,
Yeah,
where they,
so the right-of-way goes out to the center, maybe or not be the center line, but I think we've had some situations where if it's under a certain height, it's an FPE, it's private property. So if we want to further strengthen that, maybe that's a zoning code issue, but.
Actually,
There's a 33-foot FPE.
Right.
In the example in Idaho, they could put that fence within the FPE, and there'd not be a lot that we could do about it. Within that 33 feet. Now, again, they're not going to put it in the pavement of Idaho Road, but there's no sidewalk there. They're going to put that fence, and this last one here, it went up on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then Monday, we went and had the conversation to them about drainage. And it was up. There wasn't a lot we can do about it. I can show you the property on that particular one, Mr. Wilson, as to how that
Yeah, well,
plays out.
Don't confuse FPE with right-of-way and
Correct.
all these other
Yeah, you cannot
property
put a
issues.
fence in the right-of-way.
Right.
But we struggle on these FPEs where, okay, well, we'll allow you to put a barbed wire fence depending on where you are, or some sort of wire fencing, and then we try to discourage a block wall. But we can't prohibit you from putting a block wall in an FPE at your property line. Where, and again, a lot of them are FPEs where it's just a wash down the middle of it, and people just may or may not put something there. Where it comes into play is when it's Idaho or Broadway or some of these other ones that are a little more tricky.
I always thought that if you put a fence in that area, you, as the property owner, had to realize that the city had the right, whether it's utilities or whatever comes in and wants to use that you would be responsible for, I'll say, removing the fence or paying to have the fence removed.
So in certain cases, say the right-of-way, say on Idaho is ultimate 50 feet. Right now, we have a 33-foot, there's a 33-foot FPE there. So there's another 17 feet. So they move that fence right up to that FPE line, if you want to call it that. If we ever do we have to buy that 17 feet, and we probably would relocate the fence. That's the example I guess I'm talking about. Where because there's no fence permit, we can't have the conversation with them to say, ultimately, Idaho's going to be a 100-foot right-of-way, you've moved it up close, and then, but in that case, I believe there are properties where on Idaho, the FPE is to the center line. And yes, we discourage it, but, and I'm not saying it has happened, but there wouldn't be a lot we could do if someone puts a fence in the FPE.
Until we
practical standpoint, it's not going to
Right.
happen because it's a pavement, and you know what I mean.
until we choose to exercise the right we have
Right.
to,
Correct.
if we need to expand that road and that fence is within that 17 feet.
And we have
we'll
moved
come and
fences. It's not popular, but we have on a.
And that's where it triggers what Councilmember, Vice Mayor Wilson is saying,
Yeah.
that they would be responsible, because they chose to build it in FPE. They'd be then responsible to move their fence, because now we're saying we have to expand this road. And it's for a public purpose. We'll pay you your legally required market value for the property that we're taking in the FPE, and you'd have to move your fence.
Actually, you
Is
don't
that
have.
incorrect?
Well, you're close.
Okay,
You're very
thank you.
close. You don't have
correct me,
to.
please.
If it's an FPE, the city could just say, okay, move your fence. If they don't, the city will move it.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be dedicated right away to do that, because we have that right under the 1938 Small Tract Act.
We had a situation with Mr. Quanstrom a couple of years ago where he built a fence, and it's in that area off of Southern down there in that little industrial area where he built a fence in the city. I think it was right away, and we gave him a privilege permit, which is not an ideal solution for us to do a whole bunch of those kind of permits.
Encroachment permit.
Encroachment permit,
Yeah.
So,
Seems to me that we need to be proactive instead of reactive on this. I don't know whether 3 feet is the right one, but 6 feet in the front yard. Some of these differentiate, the ones that you sent us, some of them are 6 feet in the backyard, but the front yard is 3 feet. And then others say 6 foot, but all fences require a zoning permit. Don't have to have a fence permit, you have to have a zoning permit. So there's, when you read all of this in here, you find that most of them are requiring some kind of permit. And if we sit back and just react to every circumstance, it becomes ludicrous. I mean, we have to make a decision and be proactive about it, which is helpful to people. Because if they have to at least check in, maybe not pay anything, but at least check in, say, this is where I'm gonna build it, then down the road, perhaps, nobody will make them tear it out.
So
Maybe I'm silly.
I'm reading what you sent, and yes, in one aspect it says that all the 9 cities that were presented require a permit, but it also says that 6 out of those 9 don't require a permit until they're over 6 foot. Then you have 8 foot and 10 foot. You have,
Except for Oral Valley, which
you-
requires a zoning permit.
right, and so, Gail had said, well, they all require a permit. Well, kind of, yes, but not until they go over a certain foot,
Right,
and
that-
most of them are 6 foot. My
that's what
next
I
que-
said. I think I said that. It's up
Yeah,
to you. It could
well-
be 3 feet,
Well,
6 feet.
well, when you say that all the cities we compared it to require a permit, that's not quite what this says. They do, but over 6 foot.
Correct.
Not, okay. So
Correct.
there is a difference. And I have a question that Robin just brought up. What's the difference between a fence permit and a zoning permit? Because some of these are talking about zoning permits, and some of them are talking about fence permits. So what would be the difference?
A fence permit is like a building permit.
Okay?
Zoning permit is like what we call an AUP, or administrative use permit. We have administrative use permits for cargo containers. We have them for, a caretaker living in an RV in the backyard. So we have administrative use permits. That's a zoning permit. So it would be an administrative permit
And
for
so
zoning.
how-
And so again, for example, in the RSGS lots, again, you can have or I think it's citywide, so you can have a 4-foot fence for the top 2 feet. So we don't require, if the whole thing is 6 feet or under, we don't require a permit. So we don't give a permit in that case, where we could do a zoning permit and say, okay, Yes, your fence complies with the zoning code. All it really would be is an acknowledgement that you've complied with the setbacks.
But would it have a piece of paper attached to it that said, this fence did
Complies with zoning.
comply, so that, owner of the property 3 and 4 down the road would still have a paper trail that it was in compliance at that time?
Yes, that way you'd have something of record to
Right.
say, yes, when I built this, it was in compliance. If you change the regulations down the road,
Right.
then you'd at least say, yes, it was built to the code at the time.
But even if we don't charge, as long as they come in and we can explain ahead of time the right-of-way and the FPE, we're still ahead of the game, even without a fee, correct?
Again, that's certainly your prerogative. You folks decide whether you want to leave it as is, whether you want to change it. I'm suggesting that we have cases where it would have been a good practice to preserve right-of-way for the future, had we at least been able to have a conversation and explain to them where they could put the fence.
I agree.
Robert, are you still with us?
I
believe it's Tuesday where you are.
What's that?
I believe it's Tuesday where you are already.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It wasn't even paying attention to the
Okay,
phone.
go back to sleep.
No, actually, if I may, I was just wondering, going back to what Robin was saying, so you use Idaho Road as an example about easements, and if somebody's property line and the fencing, and it got to the point where, okay, we're gonna do something with this road, then the city has the right to come and, take the fence down if the fence is falling in the easement. Is that what I was hearing?
Yes.
So, and does that philosophy apply to commercial as well?
Yes.
Okay, so I was just wondering, I was thinking of a different situation and how that could ring true to that situation. Okay, that's all.
So there's a mechanism then.
You don't have to decide now. Again, you can leave it as it is. We're fine with that. You want to change it, that's up to you. Tomorrow night, I guess, would be, if you decide to adopt things tomorrow night, then you can make that final change. Do you know what page that's on, Dave? Can you find that?
So,
you can call our attention.
Tomorrow,
So
we're
tomorrow
gonna-
night-
we're
So page
gonna line item
15.
it tomorrow, or what?
So tomorrow night, you have Joel, maybe you can help us out here. We have item 8, 9, and 10. Where would they address the different parts of this?
Well, tomorrow night would be the public hearing on those items. So that's when you decide whether you want to go forward with the ordinance as it's written or as amended. So the motion would amend it if you want to make changes. Or if you don't feel like you have enough time, then you can continue it also to another date.
Did Robert, did you have questions about he had questions last time about the air conditioning?
Yeah, I think it was
That was
resolved.
addressed.
No, they worded it. I read that section. I'm okay with it. I mean, it makes better sense the way they reworded it.
So there's 3 items. One is an ordinance change. I think it just changes the name of the department or division. That's a fairly simple one, right, in Chapter 3, or Volume 1, Chapter 3, okay? And the other is the resolution, which adopts the ordinance, so we don't have to publish it like you always do. But the one that is the Chapter 7 buildings, that's the one that has the meat. So the administrative code is the section I think we've been spending most of the time with.
Which is item 10 tomorrow,
Right.
that'd be the one they would,
Yeah,
if
that's
they had
in
amendments,
the-
that's the one they would.
So I think,
adopt
again,
amendments.
I hope you comfortable with how we've addressed the horse shade issue. If you want that to apply to all gazebos, that you would make tomorrow night. If you want to keep the fence thing as it is, then you just change 3 to 6 tomorrow night.
Hey, Larry,
Yes, sir.
the horse thing. So can I or can I not park my Trans Am under there?
Does it fit?
If you put a tail on it.
You could set this over the top of the RV after you've cut the front and the back off, I guess.
Oh, okay. Don't want to do that.
That's it. That's all,
Okay,
Your Honor.
any other last comments before we break? So we'll be adjourned until tomorrow.
Good night, everybody.